Now, Israel's claim that Palestinian relief organization UNRWA was in bed with Hamas, justifying a cut to over half of UNRWA funding, is now falling apart because of a new American report that was unable to validate Israeli claims. That's right. An intelligence assessment by U.S. intelligence cannot verify that large numbers of UN workers have links to militant groups. Recall that Israel first alleged that just 12 UNRWA employees out of the 30,000 operating in the region were connected to Hamas before broadening their claim to include about 10% of all UNRWA workers after some pushback against the idea that Palestinian aid should be cut in the midst of humanitarian crisis due to the outlier behavior of a small minority. Now, last month, Secretary of State Antony Blinken called Israel's charges against UNRWA highly credible, and the UN summarily fired the employees that had not already died in Gaza. Now, the U.S. National Intelligence Council report assessed with low confidence that a small number, the Wall Street Journal used the word a handful, of UNRWA staffers participated in the October 7th attack. Now, notably, the Wall Street Journal reported that Israel hadn't shared the raw intelligence it's relying on. Note also that, as we reported over a week ago, the Israeli dossier that was apparently the basis of these claims and the basis for the quick firings, absent due process, of the UNRWA employees accused were themselves cursory in nature. Israel Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, who once famously referred to the siege on Gaza as a fight against, quote, human animals, continues to claim that 12% of UNRWA staffers have links to Hamas or to the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. UNRWA is set to lose $65 million in funding by the end of this month. As a result of these allegations, 18 states or institutions, including the United States, have cut funding. Meanwhile, an estimated 700,000 people are reportedly on the verge of starving to death in Gaza.
Meanwhile, in an interview from earlier this month, former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi claimed that U.S. weapons are not currently going toward Israel's war in Gaza.
Oh, I thought we had a clip,
we're not playing that clip
of that. All right. But so this was big news, since obviously the basis of this huge cut in UNRWA funding, UNRWA being the sole, basically, humanitarian institution that's been responsible for not just relief efforts in the wake of the siege on Gaza, but also education, administering to the health needs of the population. Basically, the entire social safety net there has been seriously imperiled and is set to run out of money by the end of this month, in some cases having to reel back their operations, has all been based on this claim out of Israel that also happened to come down on the same day as the ICJ reporting, finding that it was plausibly committing a genocide, and it felt a little bit like retribution there. So all of this was based on this claim that is now unsubstantiated or unsubstantiatable so far by U.S. intelligence. Well,
so help me understand. Is the claim that 10% of the members, which would have been of UNRWA, which would have been, I think, hundreds of people or more, that has not held up? So Wall Street Journal said, so they have found that a small number, but couldn't that have been the initial 12?
Yeah, that's the point. That when the service first reported, again, hours after the ICJ judgment that Israel was plausibly committing a genocide, it was that there were 4 UNRWA employees that were participants on October 7th. Once the United States immediately said, we're withdrawing funding. Now, the UN immediately fired those people, up to 9 people total, I think, that were included in a broader claim. The U.S. immediately said they were going to withdraw funding, along with, I believe, 8 or 9 other countries whose total contributions amounted to a little over half of UNRWA's entire funding, immediately within the same day or a 24-hour period of time. Immediately after that, there was a great deal of pushback saying there's 30,000 UNRWA operatives, UNRWA employees in the region. They employ largely Palestinian workforce. The idea that you found 4 bad actors, even if you believe all of that and all of that's true, even if you found 12 bad actors, the idea that you're going to basically hamstring an important agency like UNRWA's ability to function at the same time that Palestinians are experiencing a humanitarian crisis is insane. And that's when we got the following Monday, I think you reported on this, that the Wall Street Journal put out a new report saying, well, Israel is now claiming that 10% or more of UNRWA staffers have ties to Hamas. And those ties, even in themselves, if you take that report at face value, it's saying things like I have a family member, my butcher is, those kinds of things, which I would argue that is in of itself an overreach of a claim. But even taking all of that on face value, now American intelligence has looked into this. And you can imagine what the incentives here are. America has acted really aggressively on this information, and it's frankly in the country's interest to find a there that justifies it putting all of these Palestinian people in such a perilous position. And in fact, they were not able to substantiate this broader claim that Israel has been making, that there's a substantial relationship between UNRWA employees beyond this handful and Hamas or any other terrorist organization.
I mean, you won't agree with this, but from my perspective, whether it's 4 or thousands of people, I wouldn't want American tax dollars put toward this purpose. And I think I don't know, but I would like to see a poll of the American people, and do they think their money should be taken from them by a UN agency and given to people in Gaza? Now, I also think a lot of the American people in this poll would show opposition to funding Israel on the other side, so I'm not being inconsistent here. I think American tax dollars should be spent at home, not overseas, either way. But that would be my position on it.
Well, many folks are pretty concerned about the 30,000 people dying. The imagery has just been pretty horrific. I mean, the number of children, babies wrapped up in the now iconic white funeral sheaths that have been lining streets in sidewalks outside of hospitals, former residential areas in Palestine, the horrible imagery that came out while so many Americans were watching the Super Bowl of a young girl dangling with her legs having been ripped off from a wall because of the bombardment that was happening the night of the Super Bowl in Rafah, and news that a ground invasion into Rafah, where 1 million Palestinians, almost half the population, have been corralled because they've been told to move and move and move into these spaces that are supposed to be safe, until now they're being told that this last remaining safe space, allegedly this huge refugee camp, which has been the subject of bombardments over the last days in preparation of this Israeli ground campaign, is going to also be subject to this Israeli ground campaign. At the same time that an actual pen, I mean, we talk about Gaza being an open-air prison. Now, a literal smaller penned enclosure is being built on the other side of the Rafah Gate in Egypt, which seems to be the intended final destination for this population, building what we call during World War II ghettos, where Jewish people were housed before their mass extermination, are being something that's very much an echo of that horrific historical moment, is being assembled as we speak in the desert in Egypt. And so there are a lot of people who are really looking to the United States to intervene here. Mehdi Hassan was on Pod Save America this morning. He just wrote a piece for The Guardian. I think he has a new staff position there, where he pointed out that Reagan was able to pick up the phone and end the Israeli siege on Lebanon in the 1980s with a phone call, and he was surprised by his power to do so. So why is it that Joe Biden, knowing that without his funding, this assault cannot continue, is so unwilling to intervene on behalf of the civilians of Gaza, at the same time that he seems to want to have the protection of news stories that say that he is disgruntled, unhappy with Benjamin Netanyahu and his behavior? All at the same time, his representative at the UN is vetoing ceasefire agreements. And all at the same time, he has chosen not only to withdraw our funding for the humanitarian support of these Gazans who are on the precipice of mass death and starvation, but to do so on the flimsiest of evidence.
We will be back with more Rising right after this.